better way to go back through the last decade? They bring in two guys that have been a part of either, well, you guys have been a part of all of it, in some form or fashion with Northwest Missouri Western High School sports. Matt Tritten, Dave Riggert, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves first to anybody who may not know your involvement with sports in this area for the last 10 years.
I was here at KQ2 from 2011 through 2015, sports reporter, then sports director for a while. Now I'm up working at KXCV Radio in Maryville with the Bearcat Radio Network.
And I came into St. Joe in 2009 and started as the sports director at Eagle Radio in St. Joseph. I'm still doing that, so I've been a part of this entire decade in St. Joseph as far as high school sports, and then I've been doing Missouri Western play-by-play since 2011, so been a part of the Griffin broadcast for a long time too. So I've seen a little bit of everything throughout the years, and then doing a lot of Mustangs things as well, as Matt worked for the Mustangs and Chris has worked for the Mustangs. So we know a lot about the sports around St. Joe, especially this last decade.
So going through, we'll have a couple different segments we'll bring to you, just talking about whether it's college, high school, or the Mustangs too. We'll get right to Northwest Missouri Western. We'll start this first segment with those two schools. Probably just start with the biggest game between the two schools. We'll go back to 2012, the MIAA championship up in Maryville. What do you guys remember from that one? Because that's probably the biggest rivalry game between the two, in this decade, besides the playoffs.
Well, the rivalry is special, as we all know, and you two both going to school there and then me coming in and being a part of this. And the early part of this decade, there were just tremendous football games. We talk about the 2012 one, but even in 10, 11, and then leading up to 12, Missouri Western won 2 out of 3 at one point in time, and that's almost unheard of against Northwest Missouri State. And then it leads into the winner-take-all championship in 2012, and Missouri Western rallies from a 17-0 deficit to get that win, and that was their first ever outright MIAA championship. As Coach Partridge, his son was the quarterback as a junior. Their embrace afterwards. So that was the most special season that I've seen of Griffin football, and it came in this decade, and that was just an entertaining football team with the likes of David Bass, Michael Hill. The year before it was Greg Zerline. He actually wasn't on that 2012 team, but some NFL guys were on that team, and then that Northwest team, and then they've obviously had great teams throughout the entire decade too.
The 2012 game was so fun too because you go into it, it's in Maryville, it's a hostile environment. It's obviously huge for Missouri Western coming in, trying to knock off the Bearcats on their home field. And you talk about the Michael Hills of the world and Jeremy Weston and Travis Partridge and Ben Peaster and guys that are homegrown St. Joe guys or from the area trying to go up there and get that win at Northwest Missouri State. And I remember shooting highlights on the sideline and looking up about 8 minutes left and Missouri Western down 2 scores thinking they basically had to play a perfect 8 minutes to come out and find a way to win this football game. And they did. They came out and did that. And it was pandemonium on that Missouri Western sideline because it was such a huge victory to put themselves over the top in one of the biggest games in Missouri Western history.
And I think they still kind of feel like little brother compared to what Northwest has done in their national championships. But that year, that day, they finally beat Big Brother and got that championship, and especially doing it on their field, getting it outright. That was a special moment for Western football that I don't think many people will forget for any time soon.
Northwest Missouri State then turns around in 2013 and puts together one of the most dominant performances throughout a whole season in their program's history by going 15-0. And it was a really good run from 13, 15, and 16 winning national championships. That 13 team, Trevor Adams, the most efficient passer in the country, set records for completion percentage at Northwest Missouri State. And it really felt like that 2012 game against Missouri Western springboarded the Bearcats because maybe Missouri Western still kind of felt a little bit like a little brother, but Northwest had a big chip on their shoulder after that game in 2012.
And Northwest went on to win 2 more national titles in the 15-16, but you also look Missouri Western, they went some bad times, down times for a couple of years, but now they've won 2 bowl games in the last 2 years too.
Yeah, they went down. It started to go downhill, unfortunately, and then Coach Partridge resigns. Matt Williamson, an alum, comes in, and then all of a sudden, you start to see it building a little bit. Only 4 wins in year number 1. Even we look at a guy like a Josh Caldwell, was an all-MIAA running back at Missouri Western, and then he gets dismissed from the team. He ends up as a senior at Northwest Missouri State. That's something that you probably wouldn't have seen 10 years ago, but it had happened this decade. But then 7 wins, up to 9 wins this year, and you mentioned back-to-back bowl wins. So I think we're on the cusp of getting maybe back to the early part of this decade with the Missouri Western-Northwest rivalry. We saw that a little bit in week 1 here this past football season.
Matchup 2 years ago between Northwest Missouri State and Missouri Western. And outside of a few big plays for Northwest, a really competitive, close game. And then this year coming around, Missouri Western takes that lead in the 4th quarter. And Braden Wright able to manufacture a couple drives. The Bearcats able to still come out and get that victory back in week 1. But it does feel like things are starting to percolate between these two programs again.
And the one thing with Northwest, too, and getting to know Coach Churchman and the coaches that have been at Northwest throughout this decade just working at the radio station, it's just there's so much pressure on that program. I remember talking to Coach Wright after his first year. They go 9-3. They made the playoffs. They go 9-3. It was a down year. I mean, and he felt that from the fans and from the Bearcat faithful. That's just the expectation that program is at now. And this decade, I think, has raised the bar even more because of what they've done. And there's a ton of pressure week in and week out on that program, and they know it, and usually they live up to the expectation. And the one thing that's been fun to see, again, from the outside looking in, even from a different program calling their games, is, you know, some schools are football schools, but now all of a sudden Ben McCollum has made this a football and basketball school, and now he's won 2 national championships two of the last 3 years. They're perennial #1 in the nation every single year. They've been #1 in the nation many times. So what he's done with that program, when he first took over the program, when I first got to town, they were kind of where Sundance Wicks and his program is right now, kind of trying to find their way, struggling. He had some losing seasons his first couple of years. People don't remember that, the early part of when he took over and then the early part of this decade. And now all of a sudden, 5 consecutive MIAA championships, 2 of the last 3 national championships, and a chance to do the same thing with those 2 again this year.
And one of the fun things, too, that Coach Mack, a story he told quite a few years ago, but he called his mom up. I think it was in the 2010 season. They had a losing season, 09-010, and then 10-11, they're off to a tough start again. He calls his mom up. He's like, I just don't think I'm a very good coach. I don't think I can do this. But I think there was a little bit of trying to be David Moe from Emporia State, who he worked under, trying to be a little bit of Steve Tapmeyer, who was his coach at Northwest Missouri State. All of a sudden, he became Ben McCollum, and that program's really taken off. I mean, some of the best guards that we've seen around the country, from Deshaun Cooper to Justin Pitts, now Trevor Hudgens and Diego Bernard. He's really done a great job of recruiting and helping develop some of those young guys, and so it's been a lot of fun to watch.
And then also on the women's side, we saw Northwest early part of this decade make the Final Four here in St. Joseph. And I remember early in my tenure at the radio station going down and talking to Coach Steinmeier, and he was so fun to work with, and he's still around Maryville and still a part of that program a little bit. But they make the Final Four early in this decade. They've had some rough years since. But Missouri Western in 2016, Rob Edmondson takes over the early part of this decade after some really down years for Western women's basketball. They build it up. They have LaQuinta Jefferson, the MIAA Player of the Year, Serafina Handy, Chelsea Dewey from East Buchanan's playing for them, and they go 20-2 in the MIAA. No one's ever won more games in league play. And normally they don't play 22 games. They did that year. They will next year, but they won 20 of the 22 and won 27 games that year. Unfortunately, some injuries late in the year didn't get them an MLA tournament championship or deep into the NCAA tournament, but still 27 wins. Hadn't seen that since middle 2000s when they were perennial year in, year out, an NCAA tournament team. So 2016 was a pretty special year for Coach Edmondson and the women's basketball team at Missouri Western too.
And we go on and on about Northwest Missouri Western. A lot more happened, but that will do it for our conversation on Northwest Missouri Western. We'll have more coming up the next few days on high school and the St. Joe Mustangs.
Last Saturday. Who's on top? To head back to Maryville, Missouri.